Kenny Silveira is a U.S. Botanic Garden plant specialist on the exhibits and displays team. At the garden, he cultivates beautiful and diverse plants and creates stunning displays. He is an expert plant breeder and has developed his own varieties of Canna Lilies. Welcome, Kenny.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. Well, let me share some examples of cannas from our collection at the USBG. Kenny, can you tell us a little bit, what are we looking at here?
Sure. So on the left, we have more of a species type of canna. There's about I'm gonna say 11 to 12 species out there of cannas, which most of them you won't even, you won't find them in a garden center or anything like that. There actually are two that are native to the U.S., and most of them are usually around in South America. There's a couple high elevation ones as well, which we have a few of those. So normally the species tend to have a smaller flower on them, as you can see in the picture, and they're usually pretty big. They're usually much bigger than the usual run-of-the-mill ones you can get at any store or garden center like that, because they've been bred for years to just get a shorter plant that just has a lot more flowers on it with a bigger flower, more of an impact. And then the one on the right with the larger flowers is actually a selection of the one next to it, which is a water canna. Water cannas have more of a grayish, bluish foliage. They're called Canna glauca meaning blue, or meaning it has like a waxy kind of sheen over it. And as you can see, that selection has much bigger flowers than the parent plant itself.
Got it. Very cool. And so at the USBG, you're involved in a lot of canna breeding. Can you tell us more about how that works and how you got into it?
So it all started, I want to say, about 6 years ago. There were this new hybrid that came out called the Canova series of cannas. The big draw for them was the fact that they were all seed grown and they were really easy to come up from seed, which is usually helpful against viruses because most viruses won't go through seed. So you can get a lot of plants quickly from these seeds that came out, and they were coming true to seed. I'm not sure how they actually did it, but they were able to figure out some F1 series that they can actually collect all these seeds from and have the right plant come from the seed, which with cannas, it's very unusual because they will cross with each other like crazy, and you never know what you can get out of those selections. So I didn't even know that you can actually grow them from seed back then. So they actually came up really easy. And then I had a few of them there already that we had left over from a couple displays because I have to collect them because that's me. And then I found the next year, I'm like, I want to try growing some seeds from the leftover ones, from the Canovas to see what would happen. And to my surprise, a ton came out totally different than the parent plants. And that's what kind of got me going on this whole adventure in canna breeding. It was exciting to see because you never know what you're going to get. So you have a whole grab bag of just random colors and random textures, random flower shapes. So I thought that was pretty fun to have that happen. It was a little surprise when you come in the morning and you have just had something totally different pop up.
That's so cool. And we're seeing an example of that right here, aren't we?
Yep. So what we have on the left with that really pendulous flower, that is Canna iridiflora, which is a very rare species that comes from the highlands of Peru. So that one actually does like it a little cooler, and it will bloom in the winter, which can also pose, well, for us it blooms in the winter, which can pose kind of a difficulty because most of our cannas bloom in the summertime. So we actually have to have some growing next to them so I can cross them, so we can actually get flowers on them and get them to cross. The one on the top left is a hybrid that, we made a couple years ago. So what I wanted a purple leaf iridiflora. And then, after that, which is amazing that I got it that quickly. So the one on the right is actually one of the outcomes of that breeding project. We had some that came out, half the seedlings, we probably had about 10 seedlings that grew. Half of them came out with green leaves with really nice pendulous pink flowers. The other half came out with various saturations of purple. And that one you see there is one of the darkest ones. And then eventually those flower heads will actually get more pendulous as the plant gets bigger. So, and the plant itself will probably get about 8 feet tall eventually. They get pretty big.
Wow, that's
So yeah,
amazing. And you've worked on several plant varieties or canna varieties. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the varieties that we're looking at here?
yeah. So some of these are my babies from about that big pink one, that peachy one. That one was one of my first ones that popped up probably about 6 years ago from those random seeds, and it has been amazing in the landscape. It has come back probably 5 years outside, no problem. Has gotten huge, and those flowers will just keep going on from about, I want to say, about mid-May until frost. So that one was definitely a winner, and it spreads pretty well too, which is something that I also look for when I'm looking for better plants, is how much it will clump and spread. Because the more rhizomes you have, the more flower heads you have. And then I want that, it has a nice large flower to it. It's really bright. It has almost like a bluish foliage too, which makes you think it has glaucite in there somehow. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, that's been a pretty tough one. It's been great. Um, and as you can see, you get so many different shapes even. So that little yellow one is actually is an indica selection that we got from one of the tall giant orange ones. And somehow it came out yellow, and it has more of a little like tubular flower with bigger, well, I'll say petals for now, but those actually, we can go to like the specifics of, the flower botany later on if you want. But yeah, it has a bigger flower than the mother plant, and it came out yellow, which is kind of cool. And I kind of like how it has that different, more tubular flower, which I would bet hummingbirds would probably love. And then some that get like really droopy. You can get so many different shapes if you just have a bunch of genetics mixed up in there.
That's very cool. Well, you were mentioning, we've talked about rhizomes and seeds, so I wanted to get a little bit into kind of the plant parts that folks
Sure.
will see when they are planting cannas. Can you tell us a little bit more about these images?
Yeah. So the bottom one and the right one are both just different variations of some rhizomes. The rhizomes is a modified stem that is the food storage basically, and the holding area, for winter. So this is what would be hiding underground. These guys just decided to grow out of the pot and get all crazy. So that's what you see there. And even some of the rhizomes have a really beautiful color to them, even aside from the flower, which is nice. So these are all the ones that are cut back for the fall, for fall storage, and then you can easily see the rhizome just popping out of there. The top left is actually the canna seed, and if you look at that bottom right one, that's just a plain seed that hasn't been scarified. So scarified is when I take a file or like a little Dremel, and what I'm doing is trying to get to that white endosperm, which will, after planting, it really helps the canna seed to pop up quickly with a little bottom heat and some water. But that allows the water to actually get into the seed, which will trigger its germination. Because otherwise, the seeds, you can plant them and they will just sit there and just kind of grow whenever they want or whenever they can get the water into them. But it's such a tough seed coat that it actually can take quite some time for the water to get in for the seed to actually pop. I have some seeds that I've had probably 7 years that even planted still, they will still come up as long as I scratch that seed coat, because they're just a tough seed. It can last a long time.
Yeah, wow, that's very cool. And you've mentioned that there are also some challenges about growing cannas
Oh
in
yeah.
a conservatory environment. Can you tell us a little
Yep.
bit more about this?
So one of the biggest challenges I deal with cannas is canna virus. They're really prone to certain viruses, which you really have to watch out for. So as you can see on that leaf, there's kind of like that spotting and that mottling on the leaf. And there's also, if you look really close, it's almost like looks like a little pixelation almost on the leaf. So that right there is a sign of the Canna yellow mottle virus, which is probably the worst virus I could possibly get, which of course I got it. That one's a DNA virus that actually can transfer through seed, which is very unusual for most viruses of plants. And it also transfers through pollen, which is really driving me crazy because I found from testing and from some of the new seedlings this year that some of the parent plants that were the pollen bearer, if I crossed it with a negative plant, the mother plant still stays negative, but the seeds all came out positive, which is crazy. So yeah. So you can't really do much if the canna has a virus. For our purposes, we can't have them at all. They have to be composted because it'll really just spread through everything. You can spread it through aphids, through thrips, through mealybug, through just cutting one plant, with a pair of pruners and cutting another one. It spreads really easy, and it's just really detrimental. So anytime I see that, it's got to go. I cannot have that. So yeah, so anyone who's buying them at any garden centers, I would really look out for any streaking in the leaf that looks just like that, or any kind of like edge burn, any like stripes that just don't look right, because there are striped cannas out there which are really actually hard to tell if they're virus or not because they kind of mix in. But any kind of strange spots on them, or anything that looks like that. They also they can get a rust on them if it's really kind of like weather like this. If it's really, really humid and kind of damp, they can get a bit of an orange rust on the underside of the leaves that will just kind of make the leaves look kind of like rubbish later on. But it's pretty easy to take care of. I just hit it with a copper spray, and it's usually fine for the season. So those are probably some of my biggest problems with dealing with them. So we're actually going through stock right now and trying to get everything cleaned up. And then anything that comes in now has to be tested and kept in quarantine until we know for sure that it'll be negative for the virus. So.
Thanks, Kenny. That actually leads us into our first question here, which I will ask, which is, do we do DNA testing at the USBG to figure out if these cannas have virus?
So we don't really do DNA testing per se. What I am doing is I'm sending them out to I think we do it to Agdia, but we're sending samples out to a lab, and they actually, I'm not exactly sure how they test for them, but this one I know that you can't do. We usually have these strips that we put for virus testing, and this specific virus actually has to be checked out with an electron microscope, I'm pretty sure. So they actually have to the samples have to be sent out to actually looked under a microscope to actually find the viral particles in the leaf.
Wow.
Which is not easy, and it takes a minute.
I can imagine. We've got lots of folks who are looking to grow cannas in different zones. So we've got someone who is living in Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Okay. Looks like zone 8A. Do you recommend cannas or any specific kind of cannas for this area?
Yeah, that is a piece of cake down there. Oh yeah, you can just plant them in zone 8. So there is zone 7 plant. They actually grow here in DC in the right spot, because I have had some that will come back and have not come back. And I can go into specifics on how that works. But yeah, zone 8, that's no problem at all. I guess it just depends on, how big you want them to get, what, flower color, stuff like that. But I would say have a blast and plant them.
Sounds good. Yeah. Can you tell us more? What determines whether a canna is perennial or annual?
So a lot of that has to do with the winter, of course. Being a zone 7 plant, they do not like to. The biggest thing with canna is you don't want to freeze the rhizomes, and all the growing tips are right at that little. Actually, oh yeah, you're on that picture, right? So the growing tips are those little, little pointy parts, of course, on the end of that rhizome. So that you do not want to get frozen, or it'll take a while for it to come back, because you can have a nice big rhizome, but if there's no growing points on it, it might not just grow at all. So you want to really pay attention to those. So when I lived back in Massachusetts, I would actually take mine in for the winter. And the best thing to do with those is I would put them in pots with some soil, because you don't want to you can get them bare root at the stores. You don't want to store them all winter as a bare root plant, because what will happen is it will actually desiccate and just dry up, and then it's done. So it just won't come back from that. So what I tell everybody is to dig them up and put them like in a crate or a pot, and put some either like potting soil or some, some kind of a moss type thing, or just something to keep them around them, to keep them hydrated for the winter. And you can hit them a couple times through the winter so that they don't dry out. They might even poke up a little bit, and that's totally fine if they grow a little bit over the winter time. That won't hurt them at all, as long as they're alive. So that would be my biggest thing. And then anywhere down here, I usually cover them up with a good thick layer of mulch in case we have a rough winter. So I'll put on a good 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top of it in a sunny spot. And I say sunny spot because I've actually had some growing in the streets of the city on one side. So on the south side of the street, it's getting shaded out all winter because, you know, the sun, the way the angle of the sun is, it's not getting any sun to warm up that soil at all. So it'll just sit there freezing cold and not get any warmth, and they just don't like that at all either. If it's cold, it's wet, they'll rot, they'll just fall apart. On the north side of the street, which will be getting more sun in the wintertime, they actually do. I have no problems with them coming up. So even just like a matter of 30 feet, a 30-foot difference, it can make that much of a difference for it to come back and survive or not. So yeah, or anything, if it's a little bit on the cooler side of zone 7, if you plant it close to your house for the winter, that is a great spot for them to, you know, ensure that they come back with covering them up, because you're going to have that heat from the house that would keep the soil just the right temperature, so they're not completely frozen, and they should have no problem coming up at all the next year.
Good to know. Thanks, Kenny. Someone lives in the low desert in Arizona. They say
Yep.
zone B, 10A. Do cannas do well in that environment?
So with that, they should grow, but the thing is, with the desert, they don't want to be completely dry. These guys love water. They love to be fed. They love to be watered. The tricky thing with the desert is, so kind of like on a tangent on that, on a side note, they love the heat, but they don't like it too hot. So if it gets anything over 90 degrees, I find that they actually stop blooming, and they just kind of sit. So they kind of go, for me anyway, they kind of go semi-dormant because, you know, we're still watering them, but they're just drying out so quickly, and it's so hot. So you might have a problem with that in the desert. That being said, you can grow them. They look great for probably like, you know, like the shoulder months, and even a little closer into winter, unless it gets too cold. So as long as you don't mind them just looking a little rough in the summertime, maybe put them in a shaded spot and keep them really well watered, they should do okay. They just might look a little bit rough when it gets really, really hot.
Good to know. We've got lots of folks who are interested in starting cannas from seed.
Yep.
Couple questions. A, how do you do that? And B, where do you find good canna seeds?
So the ones I have, I'm trying to think. So those Canova ones, the first of all, they are kind of hard to get, and this is one issue that I deal with all the time with for species for me, is since they cross so easily, I have gotten plenty of seeds from online sources that don't come out true to seed, because I'll get a grab bag of species, and I'm like, well, this isn't what it was said, what it was told, or so it's always kind of a surprise if you're buying canna seeds. Like I said, those Canova ones that I've grown before, they actually come with little laser holes in them, so they come up pretty quick. You can even just collect them from anywhere you see them growing if you want to do it that way. So get some from online, try those out. Make sure that if you're planting them, that you want to nick that seed coat to get to that white endosperm so the water can get in. They love having like heat under them. So what I do with mine is I will plant them all in a seed tray and put them in a propagation house that stays moist, and it also has bottom heat under them. So you can easily get one of those, like one of those heating mats online, which is one of the keys to getting them to sprout quickly, getting the water in them and keeping them warm, and keeping them watered on top of that too. Which I start mine in January. Like, it's probably a little harder for at home. So if you can start them in February and do it that way, you should pretty much get some good seedlings ready to plant outside probably like around May. And in a bright spot, like giving them as much light as you can give them so they don't get straggling and fall over and get floppy. But yeah, otherwise I'd say have at it and try them at home. It's really fun to see them bloom, and get whatever colors, and if they're not out there, you can basically name it and have your own canna hybrid that you've basically have grown.
Very cool. Well,
Or
speaking of,
you can cross them yourself too, they're really easy to cross.
yeah, can you tell us more about that, Kenny? How would someone, if they wanted to cross them at home, how would they do it?
Let me see if I can find one that has. Oh yeah, perfect. Can you see this okay, Grace, on there? if I get closer to it.
Yeah, that looks pretty good.
So Canna flowers are a bit weird. This is actually not a petal. The petal is actually this little part that I pulled off right here. It's really strange. They're actually called staminoids, which are, I mean, the stamen on the plant is what holds the anther where the pollen is. So these are modified staminoids. Right here, that is the stigma at the very, very tip of this. It's hard. Is it? Can you see it on there?
Yeah, if you hold it up just a little bit more. Yeah, there we
So
go.
this right tip right here, it's almost like, it's a little bit of like a whitish color, and you can see a little bit of a shine on it. That's the actual staminoid. And it's really hard because all I do is the pollen kind of hides under that staminoid that has the, well, not that actually would actually be the stigma or the pistil. So the pollen actually comes on this staminoid, is right here, and when the flowers open in the morning, it actually gets stuck on this one, and I literally just take my finger. You see it on there? It's kind of bright right here. And I
Yeah, we
literally
can
just
get a little bit.
rub it on there, and it's as easy as that.
Wow.
So yeah.
So folks can do that at home. Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, speaking of hybrids and varieties, someone is looking for a type of canna that would grow to only about 3 or 4 feet. Do those exist?
Oh yeah. Yep. A lot of the, like I said, a lot of the newer ones you can get at the stores, they're bred to keep small. They're bred to stay at about 3 or 4 feet. Yeah, that's easy. I mean, I like the giant ones. Like I want to get, for our purposes, the botanic garden, we have all the gambit of sizes. I want a giant, bold, like huge mega flower, because for us that works great in a giant garden setting. But for at home, yeah, I would definitely go for more of the newer hybrids that stay small. And you can always look online too. They should tell you the sizes that they should ultimately get.
Good to know. Well, speaking of giant cannas, someone just bought a new house and they've got lots of cannas that are really clumped together. Do you have any advice for digging them up and replanting them or dividing them?
Yeah, so cannas will spread like crazy if they're happy. It is a great plant to share and chop up and share with neighbors or friends. Some of them are most of the ones you can get from home are easy to chop up. Literally just take a shovel or a pitchfork and just split them up. What you want to do is basically, because you can rip some of them and they'll just, as long as you have all those nodes at the end with those little pointy tips, with the growing points, you'll be fine. If you chop up some by accident, you can just rip them off and you can just toss them. But yeah, basically you can get a shovel, or if they're really big, maybe a saw might help actually too. Or yeah, they are super easy to divide. They're not. Yeah, I'd say just chop them up, and I usually just rip mine apart because I want to get as many rhizomes with the growing points as possible. So you can like take a hose, get some of the soil off, and so you can see where those rhizomes actually are, and just pull them apart that way. But yeah, if a canna is happy, you can get a ton from one plant eventually. I mean, I will have a seedling that I have starting in January that will get, you'll have a gigantic plant by the end of summer if it's fed and watered well. And you can make a ton out of that one plant.
Good to know. Someone is wondering, do cannas grow well in pots?
Oh yeah, yep. Like I said, the key to that is, watering and feeding in some good soil. The thing with pots is, so in the fall, they're gonna probably, like, you want to have a big pot for a canna because it will spread. So you want to have a good, like at least, a 10 to 12 inch pot because it will fill that up by the end of summer. And those are actually great because with pots, you can literally just take the whole pot and put it in the basement or somewhere cool for the winter. And then come spring, I would take that pot back out again, and chop it up and just start all over again. And you're going to have plenty more to share or plant elsewhere. So they're very good pot plants. Just give them space to grow because they will.
Thanks, Kenny. Someone had a rhizome in a pot and they think it might have frozen and they're trying to determine if it could still be viable. Are there any ways to tell if the rhizome will still grow?
Yeah, so pull it out of the pot, out of the soil. If it's brown and mushy, the rhizome should look like a really bright like white. It should look really, it should just be like a bright white. If it has any spots of brown in it, or if it's just brown and if it's mushy, it's no good. There's no hope for that. It's done. And even like I said, even if the rhizome is, pretty white and solid, but the growing tip, if it only has one growing tip on there, it might not, like sometimes it can push new ones out, but the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty slim. So you want to make sure, because I mean, it can, but you definitely want to make sure that growing point is, is healthy. If you can push on it, it's mushy, it should be firm. So if anything's mushy, anything's brown, it probably won't come back from that. In saying that, like I have had some that I was amazed that they have grown back. So sometimes there is that a little bit of hope that it will do that, but I don't have a lot of patience.
Well, thanks for that, Kenny. You've mentioned that these plants like to be fed quite a bit. Someone is wondering if they're looking for kind of the right balance of fertilizer, what should they look for and how often should they fertilize these plants?
Oh, like any easy, 10-5-10 or 10-10-10 you can get from the store, they'd be totally fine. The ones at home, so in a pot, you want to actually feed it, fertilize it more. So I would say maybe once or twice a week. Because you also, if you water it with regular water, because you have to water these things every day. They are thirsty in the summertime. And the more you water it, the more you're going to leach out nutrients. So in a pot, I would give it at least, once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. You can actually do it at a weaker rate. So it's more of a constant kind of feed. In the ground, I just feed mine maybe once a week, once every other week, because the ground soil will actually hold the nutrients much better. And there's already more nutrients in the soil as it is compared to potting soil. So that would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Kenny. Someone is wondering about edible cannas. Are there any parts of the plant that we can eat or species that we can eat?
Yeah, so if we're still on that slide, right, with that big old green, that knob right there. So the indica, so both of these are actually Canna indica hybrids. Indica ones are, I would know, they get really tall. They have much smaller little flowers. I think there was a picture somewhere over there. So basically all cannas are edible. Some of the newer ones will have a lot smaller rhizome, which you can't really do much with. There are some that are bred, like this one called Edulus that has a really thick, like giant, almost like a little potato kind of rhizome on it. So yeah, they're all edible. I've never tried it because they get kind of mushy. I know that they make cellophane noodles out of them, I think in Thailand. And you can also, there's also a flour substitute, like a gluten-free substitute flour made from Canna indica. They're also called arrowroot or achira, which also gets confusing because there's another arrowroot, which is a type of maranta, which is also used for the same purpose. But yeah, so yeah, they're edible. I think they can make canna chips out of them, something like that, which I have also never tried. Except with potatoes.
Well, I'll have to keep my eyes peeled for those canna chips. We'll take one more question here. Someone is getting Canna Rollers, which I think are these butterflies that the caterpillars will roll up in the
Nasty little caterpillar that chew your leaves up.
Yeah, how do you control for those?
So this one, I'm not entirely. We don't have that problem here in DC, which I'm grateful for. That would not have that. I'm sure if there's some kind of like a BT spray, which was a bacillus. It's like I think it's a bacteria or fungus or something like that. So that would be the best thing to spray against those. But yeah, unfortunately, you have to just spray it for those caterpillars because I don't really know how else to control them. And plus, we don't really deal with them here. So luckily, but they are a big pain if you have cannas. I think they're really big in the south.
Good to know. And Kenny, we have a Canna Display in the garden court right now. Is that right? How about how much longer folks are local? About how much longer could folks come and see the big Canna Display?
So I'm hoping it'll go on for another 1 to 2 weeks is my plan.
Fabulous.
Yep. It's a little shady in there. It's a little darker for what they normally like. So they're not really blooming as much as they were when we put them in. So yeah, I would say another 1 to 2 weeks. Probably 2 weeks, I would say. They'll hang out in there for.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kenny, for answering all these fabulous questions about cannas. I know we didn't get to every person's question, so we're going to put our plant hotline in the chat. And we also encourage folks to come down to the Botanic Garden if they're local and come check out the cannas that we have on display. And I just want to say thank you again, Kenny, for sharing all of your expertise. And thank you to everyone who attended today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.